Uh, right. Welcome to all of you. And in fact, congratulations for having qualified for the interview. Uh, I presume most of the students are from English medium, most or probably all. In case some of you are from Hindi, I can't say other Indian languages because I'm afraid I don't know any others. But if you are from Hindi and if you have some questions, etc., I could answer them in Hindi. But I presume it's largely English, so that shouldn't be a problem. In case you have any problems in hearing me, please let me know because I'm not doing this very frequently nowadays. Uh, in fact, I have now retired from active teaching. I'm I'm busy doing a lot of writing on various things, not related to, by the way, to civil services, but to other issues, uh, some academic research, and so on. Now, in any case, I I do work on economic issues a lot in my writing. And that's why I was invited by Sankalp to talk to you on some of these issues which could be relevant for the coming interviews, right? Now, I'm sure all of you would have studied economics in considerable detail for general studies for the main examination. And hopefully you have kept in touch with with the various economic developments subsequent to the main exam also. All right, so we don't need to talk about something very basic or elementary here. Now, what should we focus on? Let me first explain that to you. See, there are a lot of economic programs, policies, etc., that keep on being announced by the government. The budget, the economic survey, of course, the budget and the economic survey will be coming up in 2025, end of January, beginning of February. Interviews will be going on at that time. So for those whose interview dates are after the budget and the economic survey, you would need to have good acquaintance with them also, because I'm sure they could arise in the interviews. But at this time, we don't have the 2025-26 budget or the 24-25 economic survey. I'm not going to be talking about the earlier budget and the earlier economic survey, because all that would have been covered as part of your preparation for the main examination. Some of the policy pronouncements that took place during the budget and subsequently are also reasonably well known. So I don't think we need to waste much time on that. In fact, any time. So what I'm going to do today is focus on some of the big issues that are coming up in the world economy and the Indian economy, particularly since last month. Some issues prior to that also, but particularly November 2024 onwards. And you probably will be able to understand why we are taking November as a cutoff point. We'll take up several topics, say 6 or 7 or 8 odd topics, but within each topic, I'll include several interrelated things. So you can get a concise idea and try to get an overall understanding. Overall understanding. I think that is more important. Not just some specific points. Of course, specific points are necessary in the interviews because you are asked, sometimes very focused questions. And plus, on a lot of these issues that we'll be considering, you may be asked to indicate your opinion or your viewpoint. Now, that's not always easy because some of them are relatively complicated or controversial, etc. Please excuse me for a minute because I'm alone and somebody is ringing the bell. I'll be back in a minute. Sorry for the interruption and break for a couple of minutes. That is the disadvantage of doing these types of things from home. Now, let's go back to what we are talking about. Uh, every 10, 15 odd minutes, we'll leave a slot for questions. So if you have any questions, please come up with those questions at that time. All right. So don't do it after every slide. That would be easier for you also. It's much more understandable. Right. Now, what exactly is the logic behind saying that I'm starting from November? Because November saw this gentleman once again elected as president of the United States. All right. Obviously, that's not news for you. Donald Trump has been president of the US earlier also. Now he's been re-elected. In fact, one has to be very careful in this. It's not really re-elected because there was a gap. He lost the 2020 election and then won in 2024. Now, we are not concerned with Donald Trump's politics here. Why he won, how he won, even these are matters of interest for the interview, but we are not going to spend any time on this. Our focus is how has this election of Mr. Trump upended the global economy? This undoubtedly is a major development for the world. And remember, we are talking about it from the economic viewpoint. We are not talking about it from international relations and politics and variety of other things that will be coming up. Focus here is on economic issues, trade, economics, growth, development, and so on. Now, this Trump factor in the world economy is rapidly emerging as the key issue for 2025. That means for the coming year. All of you know, or I hope you know, that in America, there is a considerable gap between the election and the assumption of office. Mr. Trump will actually be taking over as president after around 1 month, 20th January. So another 1 month and 1.5 months has already passed. 4 weeks are yet to go. But already, in fact, technically, constitutionally, Mr. Biden is still the president of the United States. And he will continue as president till 20th January when Mr. Trump will be sworn in. But in many ways, power has already passed into the hands of Mr. Trump. Everyone is far more concerned about what Trump says today than about what Biden says. Although constitutionally, it is Biden who is still the president of the United States. And the policies of Trump, the statements that he keeps on making on social media, these are having major drastic impact on economic policy all over the world, including India. So these are some of the things that we will be talking about today. Obviously, it's not just Trump. So ultimately, it's about the economics of it. But the impact comes from Mr. Trump's election. See, if Trump had lost this election and Kamala Harris had become the president, she's still the vice president, by the way, then American policies, economic policies, would have been considerably different. There would have been much greater continuity from the Biden period. I'm not saying that everything will change with Trump, but a lot of things will change. Trump believes in breaking consensus politics. So a lot of the things on which there is consensus in America and worldwide are now at the risk of being broken in many ways. That is what you should understand. And many of these things are connected with trade, with the world economy, the global economy. What are the most important things that Trump is expected to act on from the viewpoint of economy? Trump is a great believer in tariffs. So we'll talk about that in a short while. Tariffs. You know what are tariffs? Tariffs are basically duties on trade. Trump is strongly against immigration into the United States. In fact, that accounts for a substantial part of his support and his popularity, the anti-immigrant stance. Now, you might think that, how does that affect the economy? Well, in many ways. Indian context, think of it like this: a lot of Indian companies are dependent on the American market, particularly in IT and IT related areas. A lot of them send people from India, the engineers, etc., from India to the US to work. A lot of these things will change. Visas might become much more difficult to get. Many of these companies, of course, many of the companies like, say, TCS, Infosys, etc., in a sense, they have already prepared for what is likely to come next year. They have already set up offices in America, employed people there to make sure that they can claim that they're not taking away American jobs to India. But immigration is certainly going to be a key aspect. Another important thing, which should be more important for America domestically, but which will affect the rest of the world also, is what Trump will do with regard to taxes and deregulation. Trump is a great believer in cutting taxes. So it's expected that the tax rates in America, obviously in America, not in India, will go down. A lot of economic activities will be deregulated. That might boost American growth. But it would have a lot of other impacts, again, which we are not going to be discussing. For example, many of the things that Trump might act on may worsen the global environmental scenario. Climate change, for example. Well, Trump is not particularly enthusiastic about climate change preventive policies. So many other things will happen, but just focus on the economic part here. But keep in mind that you should know a bit about the other things also. So this is the starting point in this sense. What is going to happen in America and affecting the rest of the world in many ways. This is, I think, the key issue, at least at the moment, for the coming year. For the coming year. Now think of, I don't know, quite a few of you would be, for example, looking at the stock markets. I'm not saying that you might necessarily be an investor, but at least stock market news. You have seen that Indian stock markets have fallen considerably, or in the language of the stock markets, corrected from their highs. Some of this started prior to Trump's election, but a lot has happened after Trump's election. And it is at least in part linked with Trump's policies and ideas. Right? Now, this is the general background. Let's move on a bit further, focus on a few more things. Then we'll give an opportunity for questions. And look at this. It is, in some ways, a very impressive picture. On one side, you have the person who will be the most powerful political figure in the world in 2025. On the other side, you have by far the richest person in the world today. So look at political power combined with economic power. And See, why is this important? Elon Musk, I hope everybody knows about Elon Musk. Again, these are not things that you need to be told at the interview level. Elon Musk was one of the most important backers of Mr. Trump. He spent substantial amount of money, running into hundreds of millions of dollars. Estimate is that it should probably over $300 million to get Trump re-elected, Trump elected. And now Musk is playing an important role in the formation of this new government. In fact, Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have been appointed to what's called a virtual department in America, the Department of Government Efficiency, the DOGE. Why is it a virtual department? Because it will not actually be a department, but it will be tasked with the responsibility of improving the efficiency of the American government, cutting its size, its cost, and so on. But that's not all. Musk is playing an important role in the selection of the members of the incoming administration, the cabinet, and other officials. Musk, in fact, last week, in fact, not last week, this week, the current week, torpedoed a joint bill agreed on by both Republican Party and Democratic Party leaders in the House of Representatives. Trump came out against it, and the bill got rejected. Sorry, just a moment. One moment so that we don't have any more disruptions of this type. I'll just switch off my WhatsApp, which is on. Might keep on ringing.
सर क्या इश्यू आ रहा है आपको?
नहीं नहीं नहीं, ये मेरे कंप्यूटर पर व्हाट्सएप ऑन था, उसमें एक व्हाट्सएप कॉल आने लगा. दैट्स व्हाई इट स्टार्टेड रिंगिंग ऑन द कंप्यूटर आल्सो.
ओके,
ये लिंक्ड था व्हाट्सएप से स्टार्ट करने के लिए मीटिंग को, इसलिए प्रॉब्लम आ गई थी. तो वही मैं उसको स्विच ऑफ कर दे रहा हूं ताकि फिर से नहीं समस्या आए, इसलिए. Now, let's go back to where we were when we stopped. So is that clear that we were talking about Mr. Trump and Elon Musk? Has the screen sharing stopped? Just a moment.
no sir, it's
Or is it still on? Screen
Yes,
sharing?
It's still on.
It's still on. All right, all right.
Yes.
I don't need. I thought that maybe stop.
सर अगर कुछ इश्यू आ रहा हो तो हम शेयर कर दें क्या इसको? अशोक सिंह सर।
जस्ट गिव मी टू वन मोर मिनट, 1 मिनट के लिए थोड़ा
ओके ओके ओके।
कर ले रहा हूँ, बस स्टार्ट कर दे रहा हूँ। चलिए, राइट, आई थिंक वी आर बैक ऑनलाइन. The audio is back, and I hope you can see the screen also. And the brief description that I made. You see, why is Musk important here? Because Musk being the one of the most important businessmen in the world today, has a lot of international involvement. For example, Musk has substantial business in China. Musk wants to operate in India. All right, Tesla is not yet operational in India. Tesla has not yet been allowed to start selling or setting up a plant. Indian government has put certain conditions. Now that Musk is going to be a key personality in the Trump administration, although he will not be part of the cabinet, etc., but there's no doubt that he will be playing a major role. So this could affect the Indian government also. Indian government's approach with regard to Musk and Tesla could undergo a significant change thanks to Musk's influence in the American government. And similarly, China. China is the country most threatened in economic terms by Trump, and which we'll point out in a short while. China is hopeful that Musk would be able to help them out to some extent. He may not be able to solve all the problems that China will face, but I think they have hopes that Musk will play a role in helping out China various steps that Trump is likely to take. So this role of Musk is again going to be important from an economic viewpoint also, and what sort of influence it has on policies in India, in China, relations between, say, India and the US, China and the US. Musk will also be a factor. You will not be able to deal with Mr. Musk as just another businessman, but as a key person in the new US administration. Now, having clarified some of these points, now let's move on to the specific points, issues now. What are these specific issues that we are concerned with? Well, one is the tariff threats that Mr. Trump is putting forward. China is undoubtedly the biggest target for Trump for various reasons. So what has Trump been saying? I've listed some of the points and I explained them briefly. Trump's approach is a trade protectionist approach. The global economy in the last few decades has been based on a free market approach. You studied Indian economic changes, the liberalization, privatization, globalization that took place in the 1990s in India. Now, that was based largely on free trade. Now, in some ways, we are going back to an earlier period. Trump is a great believer in trade protectionism and in the use of tariffs to deal with economic threats. So, what's the idea here? Trump is determined to use tariffs as a tool of international diplomacy. The threat of tariffs, either just a threat that I'll put 100% tariff on your exports to America, or sometimes actual tariffs. And obviously, he expects to get his way on various economic issues using this tariff tool. Now, America was the country which was the proponent of free trade. America was the country which used to pressurize India and others to adopt free trade to reduce tariffs. Now it is America which is going to be using tariffs as a major tool of economic policy. So this is, things have been changing earlier. Even in the last Trump period, you had significant use of tariffs, but it's expected that it will be much more important this time. He's put far more emphasis in this coming term. So what might Trump do? Well, look at China first. See, these are some of the things that he can do. He can increase tariffs significantly on Chinese goods. He's talked about various figures. Sometimes he says 100%, 10%, 20%. Now, we'll have to wait and see what happens January 20th onwards when he takes over as president. But equally importantly, he will probably tighten restrictions on export of US technology to Russia. To China, not Russia, China. Because China is emerging as a major threat in the technological sphere also. Rapidly advancing technology in China, catching up with America, partly using American technology. Now, Biden was also doing this, but Trump is likely to do this on a bigger scale. Now, China has been using its massive reserves to buy assets all over the world, make investments in different countries, including America. So Trump has already threatened that he will curtail Chinese investments in US. These are some of the changes that are likely as far as China is concerned. And the whole idea here is Trump says that he is the proponent of MAGA, Make America Great Again, America-centric approach, deal with economic and political threats arising from other parts of the world through an aggressive approach. This is an aggressive approach. And the way things are going, it is likely that there will be significant reduction of economic ties between the two biggest economies in the world. The biggest economies are America and China. And of course, they are also geopolitical rivals now. We are not discussing the geopolitics of it here. Just focus on the economics of it. This is what is the likely scenario. Now, I'm not saying that all this will necessarily happen, but this is the way it's happening. Now, China is at least a geopolitical rival and a threat as far as America is concerned. And Joe Biden's government also agreed on that. But what about other countries? Now look at a couple of more examples, Canada and Mexico. These are the two main neighbors of America. Canada on one side, Mexico on the other side. They are supposedly friends of United States. There is a US-Mexico-Canada agreement, free trade agreement. And this agreement, by the way, was reached in Trump's last term when he was president last time. But he has already threatened tariffs on both Mexico and Canada. So it's not just a question of rivals and opponents. Even the friends are not going to be spared. That's where India will also come into the picture. This USMCA, by the way, had replaced something called NAFTA, which you may have studied at some stage. Trump had described NAFTA as the worst trade deal ever made, responsible for widening American trade deficit, costing America millions of manufacturing jobs, especially in the auto sector. Because, a lot of car manufacturing had moved from America to Mexico. Now, why is Trump making these threats? Now, here you come to these points. Trump feels that Canada and Mexico are not just, not just in a sense defrauding America in economic terms, but also affecting American uh, demography by allowing a lot of people to enter America through Mexico and even through Canada. And by the way, those entering through Canada, it is said, are often of Indian origin, people from India trying to enter US via Canada. Mexico, of course, it will be mostly South and Central American people, Latinos coming through Mexico. Then there are drug issues involves both fentanyl and a lot of illicit drugs, security concerns. And then Trump also says that a lot of Chinese firms have been sending goods to America via Mexico. So that free trade is being misused. So now this is no longer limited to trade. Now there are drug-related issues, there are migration-related issues, Chinese goods coming via Mexico. So all this has led Trump to make this threat that he will impose massive tariffs on both China, Mexico and Canada. Now, he's also threatened the European Union. The European Union, again, close associate of America. So threats to India should not be considered exceptional. Indian newspapers often report these threats that he will impose tariffs on India as something very exceptional. He is not sparing the closest associates of the United States either. This is a universal type of approach. Clearly, all this is going to have substantial impact on the global economic system. Now, of course, there is an important point here, and that is what is actually going to happen after January 20. These are all, remember, these are all threats that are being made in November, December. That I'll immediately pull tariffs on this, I'll do this, I'll do that, and so on. And this is before he has assumed the power. What's actually going to happen? Obviously, nobody knows. In fact, I would have doubts whether even Mr. Trump knows. And let's put it this way. There is a lot of uncertainty worldwide, uncertainty. Nobody is clear on what's going to happen. Trump's closest associates are equally, I presume they are also somewhat confused. Trump is considered one of the most unpredictable persons in, I don't know, in the world, possibly. On the other side, Trump is also famous for something else. He thinks of himself as a deal maker. This is the famous book, Trump, The Art of the Deal. Of course, this is a much younger Trump, but he's famous for this. So many people think that these might be just threats. He's not actually going to do all this. Maybe these threats will lead to discussions and negotiations. Trump would like to get concessions from other countries using these threats, concessions from China, from European Union, from Mexico, from Canada, and of course from India. We come to that also. Now, this uncertainty is making things worse. And things like stock markets, bond markets, they're all fluctuating sharply because of this rise of global uncertainty. Nobody knows how things will pan out after January 20. Now, how are various countries reacting? What is the response? Let me give you a couple of examples of response. Threats against European Union. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, what did he say? Look at that quote from him. He said, the world is made up of herbivores and carnivores. If we decide to remain herbivores, the carnivores will win and will be a market for them. Do you understand? This is a reference to Trump and to America. This statement was made after Trump started making threats against the European Union also. This was one of the statements that he made. And this looks like a challenge. Fight back. That European Union cannot take things lying down. We are also very strong economically. If Trump thinks that he can bully us into giving up some of our policies, etc., well, he needs to think again. That was the idea here. But this lasted for a very short time. European Union ran into a variety of crises in the last few weeks. The German government collapsed. Germany is the biggest economy in European Union. The French government collapsed. France is the second largest economy. European Union is otherwise also in bad trouble. So this fight back type of response disappeared very soon. And what happened after that is here. A few days earlier, Trump was in Paris, invited by Mr. Macron. He didn't invite the current American president, that is Mr. Biden. He invited the incoming President Trump, obviously in an effort to improve his relations. And this was for a major event, by the way, reconstruction of one of the major landmarks of Paris, which was being inaugurated. So Trump was invited for that. And look at the right-hand side. With Trump's threats against Canada, Mr. Trudeau rushed to meet Trump in Florida. And Trump insulted him in every way possible. There is the same Justin Trudeau who had been insulting India for the last 1 year, making all sorts of threats and saying all sorts of things. Trump even went to the extent of saying that I welcomed the governor of the great state of Canada, treating him like a governor and talking about Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States. But the basic point is that, see, America is so powerful. Trump is going to be so powerful, and Trump is so unpredictable that people tend to be afraid of him. And when I'm saying afraid, I mean obviously about his policies, not that he will beat up Emmanuel Macron or Justin Trudeau. His policies and how they can disrupt economies of various countries and the global economy. Of course, America will probably also pay a significant price if all this happens. But nobody knows with Trump. And Trump is going to be so powerful thanks to the Republican Party having a majority in both houses of the American Congress. And of course, he being the president. So everybody is, in a sense, toading up. Toading up means trying to placate Mr. Trump now before he assumes power, trying to get on the right side of him. India has gone a bit slow on this, but well, they must be doing things behind the scenes. And of course, we have some advantages in the incoming American administration. That's more the politics part, right? Now, I think having explained a few of these things, let me take a 5-minute question session. Any questions that you want to ask about any of these things? After this, we'll go much faster. So
one, I have a doubt. So am I audible properly?
yes, you are.
Since Trump is coming and there have been a lot of engagements of him with world leaders and a lot of his comments, what are the possibilities that the board panel might ask you what are the possible things that he might do? Because if we are thinking about what are the possible things he might do, it's more like a wild goose chase. He has said many things. He might do a lot of things, might not do a lot of things. So
See, I got your point, but I've already explained. See, it's unpredictable. Nobody knows how it will work out. But the types of things that he's saying, at least for now, you'll have to take them at face value. This tariff business, for example, that if he does not get his way, he might impose massive tariffs. He had imposed tariffs on China last time. That disrupted Chinese economy. Of course, the Chinese managed to deal with the threat in various ways. But this time, it could be worse because the world economy is more fragile thanks to the COVID period. So you'll have to take this at face value initially. You can't say that, let's treat this like a joke, that if he threatens more tariffs for India, India can disregard it. I don't think anybody is taking that attitude. So you'll have to say that, yes, we'll take it seriously, prepare for it, and that's what China is doing. China, of course, is facing much more serious threats than India. So maybe things won't be as bad as he's threatening. Maybe things will be better. In fact, I'll make a point on that also. But you will have to take it seriously. That's the idea. So you can talk about some of these points that I have just made, the threats that he made for tariffs, for other things also against China, and then for India also in a moment, and other countries, right?
So one more thing.
Sure.
So like in his first tenure, India because of US's sort of indirect pressure had stopped Iranian oil imports. And now also when there was talk of BRICS currency, Trump had threatened very recently that I don't know, he'll close off the US market or something. And then the external affairs minister issued a statement that BRICS currency is not on the table. So it might be.
BRICS currency will be coming to in a short while, so let's not discuss it now. All right.
Okay.
Now, the oil part, think of it this way. India was also under a lot of pressure not to buy oil from Russia. This is during the Biden period. This is not Trump. This is Biden. India did buy a lot of oil. India did buy a lot of oil despite that. And we'll come to that issue also, because that's again connected with the BRICS currency. That is connected with the BRICS currency also. Right. So we'll come to that in a short while. Right. So my point is that these responses show that people are taking him seriously. When I say people, I mean people like Mr. Macron, Mr. Trudeau, and obviously the government of India also, and certainly the government of China. Anything else? Anything else for the moment? No. So let's move on. We'll talk a bit more about China because that's a problem for India also. It's not just for America. So let's also talk about China in the economic context. China is certainly a major global economic power, exercising global influence. China claims to be doing a lot for other countries. Right? A variety of initiatives that they have taken, which I'm sure you've studied in economy. But keep in mind that it's ultimately a very China-centric approach. Just like Trump talks about make America great again, the Chinese leadership does not say Maka, make, well, I don't know whether it will be make China great again. But I think that is exactly what they're doing. So they're very aggressive in seeking economic advantage. Even the help they provide to other countries as part of BRI, for example, is targeted ultimately at Chinese benefit. Now, our concern here is more, or particularly with the trade part. See, Chinese trade has expanded remarkably in the last few decades, particularly after they entered WTO. They have trade surplus with almost all countries, a huge trade surplus with India, particularly, massive trade surplus with America. Recently, China has been facing serious economic problems. Slowdown of the Chinese economy, growth rates went down. China, in fact, almost approached a recessionary condition in various spheres, not overall economy, but in particular parts of the economy. So Chinese government has been trying to resolve some of these issues. Obviously, they are worried about slowdown of China. And the approach they have taken is basically helping Chinese manufacturers, providing more subsidies for them, providing more bank finance, and so on. So the Chinese, they have been trying to boost the Chinese production. Now, what do you do with that production? Export. So what is happening currently is that Chinese manufacturers getting a lot of direct and indirect subsidies, direct and indirect subsidies, a lot of hidden subsidies, which are difficult to detect under WTO rules. To prove that they are actually in the form of subsidies. And they are using that to export their way out of trouble. They are certainly in trouble. Economy is in trouble. And they are trying to use the world market a sort of dumping ground for their surplus, their excess production. Now, this is a problem not just for India. It is a problem for India also, by the way, but many other developing countries are facing the same problem. Some of the close associates of China, Brazil, for example, has very good relations with China. And Brazil is also very critical of America under the current leadership. Current leadership is President Lula da Silva. Now, even Brazil is facing problems with Chinese imports increasing rapidly. Indonesia, some of the other Southeast Asian countries, and of course, our own country, India, where the trade deficit is now of the order of $100 billion, with China. India has a trade deficit with several countries, but by far the highest deficit is with China and also with Hong Kong, by the way, because Hong Kong is also effectively part of China. So if you add up both China and Hong Kong, and there is a huge deficit. China is taking advantage, cheap goods, cheap Chinese goods, washing ashore all over the world, coming to India, coming to Indonesia, coming to Malaysia, coming to virtually every country. Now, why is this important? See, they are exporting their way out of recession. They are creating problems for other countries. Now, look at this graph. This shows Chinese steel exports have risen rapidly. Let's not get into the data part, but just look at this. This is India. The highest growth of Chinese steel exports is to India. Vietnam, Brazil, Thailand is slower. But Brazil is also interesting because Brazil exports a lot of iron ore to China and then imports the steel. And apparently it is cheaper than Brazilian steel. So manufacturing steel in Brazil, remember Brazil is a long way off from China. So sending iron ore from Brazil to China and then the steel being shipped to Brazil is cheaper than manufacturing steel in Brazil. This is partly obviously because of Chinese scale of production, Chinese efficiency maybe, but also because of the Chinese government subsidies that are being given to manufacturers in different ways. Now, with this type of graph, you can understand why companies like, say, Tata Steel, Steel Authority of India Limited, JSW, I'm talking about Indian steel manufacturers, all are in trouble. Their profitability is going down. They had some export market. That export market is also disappearing because they can't compete with the Chinese exports. So they are losing out on the export markets. They are losing in the domestic market also. Now, this is the type of problem that China is creating. It has happened in the past also, but recently this is, in a sense, accelerating. Partly also because, keep in mind one thing, if somebody asks you that is this always bad or is this completely bad? Well, I don't think you can say this is completely bad. A lot of cheap Chinese products coming to India must be helping out, say, more affordable alternatives for a lot of people in our country. So it's not completely bad. There is some consumer benefit coming out of this. Similarly, those who use steel for manufacturing things, if they're getting cheaper steel from China, then it's reducing their cost of production if they're using steel as an input. So this is not completely bad. At the same time, it does have significant negative impact. And the reason is that European Union, America, etc., have put variety of restrictions on Chinese exports. So Chinese exports to the advanced economies have been going down. Look at this graph going down. And look at this to developing countries going up. That is where India is also included. This is where we also stand in this part. So does Brazil, so does Indonesia, and forget about countries like Pakistan, etc. I'm not even mentioning them. This is what is happening. This is the way things are turning out. Now, next slide is, well, not meant completely as a joke, but partly entertainment value. This is what happened in Parliament last week. Rahul slams government over trade deficit touching all-time high. Now, Rahul Gandhi is also trying to improve his image, that he can talk about other issues apart from Adani. So he talked about India's trade deficit touching all-time high, which is true. The trade deficit has touched an all-time high. And the month of November was particularly bad. Particularly bad. The figures that have come in show highest level of imports, and relatively low level of exports for India. Now, I hope you've understood something, that both of these aspects are connected with China. You can't blame China completely, but even the exports being affected is at least partly due to China. Many export markets, Indian companies are losing out because they can't compete with much lower priced Chinese products which are being dumped. The surplus production that's taking place. Now, this is exactly what Trump is also concerned with. This is what Indian manufacturers are concerned with. India has put some restrictions, some anti-dumping duties, etc., on some products. I think products like, I'll give you a couple of examples in case somebody asks you, circuit boards, industrial lasers, vinyl sheets, and so on. These are some of the things on which anti-dumping duties have been imposed by India. But there are lots of others. Solar cell inputs. The Indian companies don't have a market at the moment inside their own country. Forget about outside. Because of the competition from China. So we are facing these issues. Trade deficit, again, does not mean uniformly negative. Trade deficit, in fact, Indian Ministry of Commerce often says that trade deficit just shows that India is growing rapidly. And there are other reasons apart from China, by the way. One important reason is also the rapid growth in gold imports. Gold imports have also been going up. You can't blame China for that. That is, I suppose, mainly due to well, the Indian population falling back on gold. Gold considered safer than other types of investments and savings. But there is concern. And if Rahul Gandhi is talking about it, then obviously, well, people have understood a bit of this at least. Now, what does China do in this context? A few months before Sheikh Hasina's government fell in Bangladesh, Bangladesh Prime Minister, at that time Sheikh Hasina, had gone to China. And what had she gone for? Primarily because she was also concerned with the same problem, trade deficit. Bangladesh having massive trade deficit with China, facing serious problems in financing its imports. So she went to plead with them for them to buy more Bangladeshi products. The Chinese government agreed. And what did they agree? Let me show you on the next slide. They said, we'll buy more mangoes from Bangladesh. Now, these mangoes are worth, I think, a few $1 million, and the deficit is a few $1 billion. So this is all Sheikh Hasina managed to get from China in terms of trade relaxation. India has been trying for several years. If you've studied this in economics, you realize this, that India has had lots of talks, lots of discussions, lots of promises but nothing much has happened. The trade deficit is galloping. And recent Chinese slowdown has made it much worse. So this is a problem that we've been talking about, not just for America, but for our country also. How do we deal with this? Some people think that we should become much more aggressive on these anti-dumping duties, etc. The process is very slow in our country. The Director General of Anti-Dumping carries out investigations. It's a slow process. We need to be more aggressive. We need to have better data and so on. Now, this was China with developing countries. Now turn to India and America. Look at what Trump has been saying here. Here I've quoted some statements by Trump. So this is more or less Trump's own language, and mostly at his resort, the Mar-a-Lago in Florida. These are all references to India, by the way. These statements are with respect to India. One term that Trump likes a lot is reciprocal. If they tax us, we tax them the same amount. Almost in all cases, they are taxing us. We haven't been taxing them. And then he also said the word reciprocal is important because if somebody charges us, India, we don't have to, it's slightly confused also, but his language is not very clear often. But the overall meaning is clear. If India charges us 100%, do we charge them nothing for the same? That means he says that India is charging 100% duty and Americans are not charging any duty on Indian products. Now, most of this is, by the way, not accurate, by the way. America also has high import duties on many products, relatively high import duties. Say dairy products, for example, they have relatively high import duties. So Indian dairy products cannot find a market in America. But overall, obviously, if you look at the duty structure, India's duty structure is still higher as compared to the American duty structure. Last time Trump was the president, he had made an issue of the Harley Davidson bikes. Apparently, he is a fan of Harley Davidson. So he said that India has imposed massive duties on Harley Davidson, denying them a market in India. Like one way, if I were to ask you, if somebody was to ask you, Harley Davidson, should India reduce the duty on Harley Davidson? In one way, that would be a sensible move. Why? Because Harley Davidson would have a very small market in India. How many people are going to buy Harley Davidson in any case in our country? So a few hundred Harley Davidsons being sold would not affect India's trade balance very significantly. But if it made Trump happy so that he goes slow on other things, then maybe it's worthwhile. India has a big trade surplus with America, massive trade deficit with China, the biggest is with China, and the biggest trade surplus is with America. Now, obviously, Trump knows that. And here we are talking about goods, by the way. If you include the services, the situation becomes even worse as far as Trump is concerned. So that is why he will make threats against India. And he will expect India to provide more market access to America, reduce tariffs on American products. Should we do it? Should we do it? What should we do? What can we do? Let me give you a couple of options here. Option of imposing retaliatory tariffs we retaliate, we will also put big tariffs on American imports. The problem is American imports coming into India are much less in quantity than Indian exports going to America. So their tariffs will have much more impact than our tariffs. In simple terms. And then if you look at it more elaborately, America is certainly much more powerful economically than India. The American economy is far bigger. And we're talking about economic power here. Certainly, economic power of America is considerably more than our country. I think this retaliatory tariff approach is not going to be very sensible. Approaching WTO is also not likely to work out very well. In Trump's period, WTO will become less and less relevant. WTO is losing its importance almost completely. I think UPSC probably has also stopped asking questions on WTO. I'm not sure. I've not seen the recent GS papers. But if they have any sense, they should not be asking more questions on WTO nowadays. The importance of WTO is disappearing. And Trump will accelerate that process. Trump doesn't bother about WTO restrictions. He might end up scrapping it completely, conceivably. So what could we do? What are the types of things that we can do? Well, one of the suggestions that has been made by experts, and I think the Indian government is examining it, is that look at the tariff lines. Tariff lines are, the tariffs on different classifications of products. They're called tariff lines. You classify products in different ways, and then each product line, you have a certain tariff. So look at it, strategize. Strategize means make some concessions in areas which might make the American government happy. You suffer a duty loss, undoubtedly. You will suffer a duty loss. But I think that duty loss would be a much lower cost to pay than to have a huge tariff imposed on Indian goods going to America and affecting India's biggest export market. Now, one point to keep in mind is that India can't reduce tariffs for America alone. Are you aware of this? Why can't we reduce tariffs for America alone? Why can't we say that we'll charge American products 50% less tariff as compared to other countries?
Because of MFN status, I think so.
Exactly.
WTO.
MFN, right? You're right. This is MFN bound. So you'll have to extend the same as long as WTO exists. If WTO disappears, it's another matter. But as long as WTO exists, the trade agreements exist. You can't do a country-specific tariff system. You will have to do it product-wise. All right, follow the product-wise system. But that could be done with certain products which are important for America. I think this is the lines on which Indian government must be thinking and planning. Officially, not much has been said by the government. In any case, Trump is not yet the president. So he can't actually start passing any orders. He can only keep on making threats. But the Indian government would be examining it, seeing where we can tweak things and reduce tariff rates and so on. Right? Now, another question round. Any questions now based on these things? Then we move on to BRICS and other things. Right? Anything? Go ahead.
Good evening,
Sure.
sir.
Yes.
Sir, I have one question. Like China is dominating the global markets with respect to exports, but is it only because of its manufacturing capacity or because of the currency rate manipulations?
Currency is also important. In fact, If I get time, I'll come to that also. You see, it's not just this. Currency also has played an important role. Last time, when Mr. Trump was the president and he had imposed tariffs on China, penal tariffs. How did China get around it? They depreciated their currency significantly. And the currency value went down so much that the tariff impact almost disappeared. So the end result was Chinese exports to America increased further. The American deficit went up. So Chinese
Sir, but
have done
which
this.
is
Yes.
the dominant one?
This is?
Which factor is the dominant
No,
one?
I don't think you can say any factor is dominant. I think it's choosing one of them alone.
Okay.
With a lot of countries, the currency is not so important. With India, for example, the currency factor is not important. With India, the much more important would be the Chinese scale of production, the Chinese government support for manufacturing. That would be much more important than currency. Because the Indian
Okay, sir.
currency has also been depreciating. But with America, the currency part would be important, apart from
Okay.
this. So that would vary from country to country. But certainly they do this. There's no doubt about that. You're right. But
Thank you,
keep
sir.
in mind the other factors also. We give some credit also to China. They certainly have higher efficiency, productivity in many areas as compared to, say, a country like India. I'm not comparing them with America. Their infrastructure is much better. Infrastructure undoubtedly is far better. We have improved, but we have a long way to catch up with China. Their human resource development levels are higher. Education, training, and so on are obviously higher. So these things all make a difference. Right?
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Anything else now? Anybody else?
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
Sir, like the solution you have provided in case of the tariff issue between India and USA, that is providing concessions on some products as a middle path. Is there any other solution or maybe more than one solution which you can suggest just in case we are asked this question?
The others were given in the beginning, the retaliatory tariffs, going to WTO with complaints, and so on. But I said that these are not likely to be very useful. This was my point. Because we remember that we have broader concerns also with America. We are not focusing on this political relationship, but that is also significant. We do need to have strategic ties with America also. It's not just the economic ties, but the overall strategic ties are also important. If you just focus on this issue, right, this is what we can say. But wider issues, you can also say that India building up its trade ties with other countries. India building up economic cooperation with other parts of the world apart from the United States. Entering possibly into more free trade agreements. We have been discussing with EU, with UK, all that can be moved forward. Maybe that can provide us with alternative markets. So you can suggest some things like this. But keep in mind that America still remains a very important country, both politically and economically. We need to maintain good relations with them.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Now, let's move on to this BRICS currency issue. All right. So this BRICS currency issue is actually making a mountain out of a molehill in some ways. This was suggested, I suppose, first suggested by the Brazilian president. And this time, Mr. Putin came out with this, which was considered a prototype of a BRICS currency, right? With the flags of the different BRICS members. All right. It was obviously not meant seriously, but this photograph was taken and this was circulated, and Trump in particular was very angry against this. Right, this particular thing that was displayed by Mr. Putin. Now, what is the idea behind the BRICS currency? Let's move on to that point. Here, we should consider what Putin said in this BRICS summit. The dollar is being used as a weapon. We really see that this is so. Obviously, this is the English translation. I think that this is a big mistake by those who do this. Now, what did he mean by this? He meant particularly the steps that have been taken by America after the Ukraine conflict started to isolate Russia in economic terms. For example, Russia was thrown out of SWIFT, the International Financial Transactions System. SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide International Financial Transactions. And some other ways also. And the idea was that Russian trade should be checked. Russia should be unable to sell its oil, gas, etc., or buy the things that it needs. Should not be able to use dollars. Remember, dollars are the primary international currency. Over 80% of the global trade is still priced in dollars. Of course, these figures, some places you'll find 90, some people estimate it as lower than 80, but it's considered to be slightly over 80. I think that is the best estimate that I have seen, over 80%. So they tried to isolate Russia. And this is what he meant by the weaponization of the dollar. This is something with which China has also been concerned. They also have a lot of disputes with America. They feel that this might be used against them also at some stage. Not immediately, obviously. At this stage, it has been used primarily against Russia. So this is the idea that maybe this domination of the dollar over the world financial system needs to be checked. The domination of the dollar, by the way, gives a lot of advantage to America. Other countries have to borrow in foreign currencies. When we talk about India, for example, we'll talk about India's foreign borrowings. We borrow in dollars, euros, etc. America does not have to borrow in foreign currencies. Its own currency is the main global currency. So it issues bonds. American government bonds are issued. They are bought by other countries. There is a ready market for those bonds. And it's a global market. It's not limited to America. So America has a lot of economic advantages accruing out of this. But they have also been using it as a pressure tactic in various disputes. Now, the rights and the wrongs of the Ukraine conflict are not important. We are not concerned with that, whether it is right or wrong and whether America should put pressure and so on. You can get into that, and that becomes very complex scenario. But certainly, they have been using their economic strength and their currency as a weapon. The point that Mr. Putin was making. And to check this, one possible way, in fact, the main way would be to try to promote global trade or international trade in other currencies. Now, yen, euro, sterling are used, but relatively minor. Chinese currency is also being used, but again, it still remains a relatively small component of global trade. The dominant role is that of America. Now, why BRICS? Let's focus on now BRICS for a moment. BRICS, after its expansion, this, by the way, in fact, before we talk about BRICS, let me make this point. India has been repeatedly clarifying. This is what Mr. Jaishankar said. We have never actively targeted the dollar. That's not part of our policy. Some others may have done so. Indirectly, he is hinting at China. China has been doing this. We have not been doing this. But we have a natural concern. What is the natural concern? That we often have trade partners who lack dollars for transactions, who don't have access to dollars. So how do we trade with them? Either we give up trading with them or we have alternative settlement systems. There is no malicious intent towards the dollar. This is a reference to Russia. That if Russia is isolated from the global settlement system, how do we trade with Russia? How do we pay Russia? We need to come out with some alternative. And by the way, this has been very good for India. Of course, India will say that, we are sorry that this situation has arisen. But in reality, this has been good for India. Why has it been good for India? India has bought a lot of Russian oil and some other products and paid for it essentially in Indian rupees. And those rupees cannot be used in other parts of the world. Russian imports from India are much less. So, they can't balance it out. So they are using it mostly for investments and acquisition in India. So in a sense, that is boosting foreign investment. Of course, in rupee terms, it's not really foreign investment in, say, dollar terms. So in that sense, it's not been a bad thing for India. But India has made it clear. India wants to show that we are not, we are not guilty of what Trump has been charging BRICS with. What about Prime Minister Modi? Let me cite what he said also. He said that India welcomed efforts to increase financial integration of BRICS countries. Notice financial integration. Now, that's not a bad thing in itself. Trade in local currencies and smooth cross-border payments will strengthen our economic connection. Trade in local currencies. He's making it clear that we are not aiming at some of these currencies emerging as a global alternative to dollar, but merely, using local currencies for cross-border payments to facilitate, to smoothen it out. Essentially, what Mr. Jaishankar was saying is being said in a slightly different language by the Prime Minister. Right. Now, this makes it clear, I hope you understood this, India at least is not part of any effort at developing a new currency. And India would not be interested. There are good reasons for this. And some of those reasons emerge from this table. If you look at this table, these are the members of BRICS now, the expanded BRICS. And if you look at this, you will realize that China is dominant in economic terms. Population, all right, we have crossed China. Of course, in percentage terms, we are still 18, but our population is now higher than China. But look at the economics part. 3% global GDP, 17% global GDP. By the way, 000, why is it 000 for Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, and South Africa? That does not mean that they don't have any GDP. I hope you are able to guess what is the reason. The reason is that these figures are below 0.5%. So they have been rounded off to zero. Less than 0.5% of the global GDP. So it does not mean that they have no GDP at all. But this is rounded off figure, rounded off to the nearest digit. UAE is also rounded off to zero. Russia is 2%, Brazil is 2%, but China is 17%. So roughly 30% of the global GDP is accounted for by BRICS countries. If you add up the actual numbers here, not the zero part. Sorry, missed that. Right. This is more than the United States, 26%, or the European Union, around 17%. In theory, this is the most powerful economic bloc in the world in GDP terms. But notice only in theory. Because can this bloc work together? There are many problems. One problem is, of course, India-China relations. Given the state of relations between India and China, it is most unlikely that India would like to become party to something subordinated to China. But it's not just India-China. There are problems between Ethiopia and Egypt. There are problems between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So with these political type of problems, how do you really come into a system where you have a unified currency? And of course, other difficulties that we'll point out in a moment. Any such system will be dominated by China. Will India be prepared to live with this type of domination? Never. So there's no point about it. Now, I'll just make some specific points here. What are they trying to do? The BRICS countries have sought to reduce the primacy of the US dollar. Here, India is also not very unhappy with this. Because, see, America can put pressure on any country, friend and foe. That's a point that I made in the beginning today. And well, if we look at the Adani issue, that becomes another example of pressure point on friends. If India is a friend of the US, that's a pressure point for India. So India would like to reduce the primacy of the US dollar, increase their own currency. But the problem is that this is mainly Chinese renminbi which has been playing this type of role, not Indian rupees, etc. Lula de Silva was the major proponent of this BRICS-wide currency. And some people have suggested cryptocurrency or a combined basket of BRICS currencies. Overall, Iran, by the way, has also been thrown out of SWIFT. Russia and Iran have both been excluded from the SWIFT system. So somebody had raised this question about trade with Iran. Trade with Iran, you are faced with the same problem which you have with Russia. How do you pay? If they're not part of SWIFT, how do you pay them? Now, suppose you wanted a BRICS currency for all this, what would it require? Banking union, fiscal union, general macroeconomic convergence. It's not going to come about. Nothing of this type is going to come about. How do you bring about a fiscal union or a banking union between such disparate countries and countries with a lot of problems with each other? And most experts think that a BRICS reserve currency would not be probably stable or reliable enough to be used for global transactions. The American currency also, there are questions. I'm not saying that there are no questions about the dollar, but this type of thing is even less likely to be trusted. So BRICS countries are most unlikely to come out with something of this type. And this is an example of, that's why I said, of Mr. Trump blowing up without much basis. Maybe he thought that he will preempt it, just in case efforts are going to be made in this direction, he will ensure that they don't start. So he made this statement. This is what was quoted everywhere. We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create the BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar. This, of course, is standard Trumpian language. Or they will face 100% tariff and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. These are the types of superlatives that Mr. Trump frequently uses in his in whatever he writes. Mr. Trump's spelling is often also inaccurate, but at least here he has not misspelled anything. Sometimes he misspells also. So this really is, as I said earlier, making a mountain out of a molehill. India has clarified this completely. Saktikant Das, in his last press conference as RBI governor, outgoing RBI governor, had said that we do not want to de-dollarize. There is no question of India trying to get rid of the dollar, and India entering into local currency denominated trade agreements is merely for the sake of facilitating that trade, like with Russia, for example. Right? De-dollarization is not an objective of India. And this BRICS currency also, at least the Reserve Bank of India, has nothing to do with that. Of course, Mr. Saktikant Das has now been replaced, but at that time he had made this point. And he had also pointed out one more interesting thing, that look at the geographical spread of the countries. European Union is a compact grouping. And even then, some of the European countries have not joined Europe. This is totally geographically disparate. You have countries in Africa, in Latin America, in West Asia, East Asia, and South Asia. Or, well, Europe also, Russia. How do you bring them together? What will be the basis for having a currency union of this nature? So this is most unlikely to happen. At the most, there could be local arrangements for particular trading partners. That is the only possibility that exists. Right. So BRICS, this is, I think, what we need to comment on or understand. Anybody wants to make any other observation with regard to the BRICS currency, etc.? Not the politics of BRICS, but just the currency and the economy part. Anything? Please go ahead. If nobody has anything to say, then I'll move on. Maybe later.
So,
Yes, right.
sir, we are saying that we don't want de-dollarization. But
Right.
at the same time, we are wanting internationalization of rupee. How the two things would go hand in hand?
See, de-dollarization is a tactical point. The dollar is dominant. It is dominant. Getting out of the dollar system for a country like India is not really feasible. We don't want to get into a renminbi dominated system. Rupee is not an alternative to dollar. Renminbi might be a small alternative to dollar. Rupee cannot even be a minuscule alternative to the dollar. So the idea is that as India becomes stronger in economic terms, as our, for example, GDP grows, let's imagine we sustain 7% growth over 20, 30 years, then we could become a much bigger part of the global GDP. Maybe instead of 3%, we have something like 10% of the global GDP. At that stage, these things automatically become feasible. You become more important. Maybe the Indian rupee will become part of the SDR basket at that time. So these things will happen, but that will depend on your economic growth, the strengthening of your economy, increase in your GDP, and so on. At the moment, it would not be sensible to think in terms of de-dollarization for a country like India. And to get into a sort of renminbization would be equally stupid. This is the point.
Thank you, sir.
So it's a long-term goal. It's not a short-term goal. Wait for Amrit Kal. Amrit Kal might then lead to this type of thing, right?
So I had a question.
Yes.
Sir, if we are asked that why can't India be a part of SDR, or why can't Indian currency be a dominant currency, what kind of reasoning should we give, sir?
Size of the Indian economy, the small part of India in global trade, relatively small part that India plays in global trade. These are the fundamental problems. India has to become a much bigger economy and much
Okay,
more open economy in capital flows, much more open to capital flows. We still have a variety of restrictions on capital flows. Now, we can't afford to open up completely until we are bigger. So
yes, sir.
that's
Yes.
where we stop at the moment, right? Now, let's move on to, I want to make you a short list of possibilities of how India could benefit under Trump. This is something that could also be asked. Threats are there, undoubtedly, but there could be some possible opportunities for India. Last Trump period, the policies that Trump followed, India was a net beneficiary. Of course, India was not a very big beneficiary. Vietnam was a much bigger beneficiary than India. A lot of investments moved from China to Vietnam. Vietnam became much more important. This time, Trump has also spoken about Vietnam. That is an interesting part. I have not quoted it here, but it is true. He's talking about Vietnam. And he says that the Vietnamese have also benefited. We have to make sure that this does not happen. So now the hope is that maybe Vietnam will also be faced with some types of restrictions. Then India becomes more significant, hopefully. Now, Indian rupee is going down. As you know, it's been reaching record low levels. It is likely to go down a bit further. Now, how does this help us? This might help us because we are depreciating also with respect to China. It might prevent more Chinese goods from entering India. Chinese imports become more expensive. That's one good feature for the moment. It might also provide an opportunity to foreign investors. Indian rupee depreciating, think of it this way. Let's say they could buy 80 rupees with $1. Now they can buy 85 rupees with $1. So obviously their investments go further. Of course, that single factor will not be enough, because there have been outflows of capital from India in the last few weeks. There are other reasons also. American interest rates, the weak performance of many Indian companies in this quarter. These factors will also matter. But nevertheless, this might give an opportunity for foreign investors to come into India. The high tariffs on China will provide Indian suppliers an opportunity to increase their sales in the US market. This is a key factor. India can hope to benefit from this. This is what Vietnam had benefited from last time. This time, many companies will not go to Vietnam, given that the Trump regime, Trump administration, is not very positive towards Vietnam either. Now, you could say it's not positive towards India, but India, they're not making the same types of threats. India, they're talking about only tariffs, not a very unfriendly type of approach as such. A lot of people in the new American administration who are very positive towards India. Some of them, of course, are even of Indian origin. Mr. Kas Patel becoming FBI director is a very interesting development. So we have, well, I should not make a statement like that, but I was going to say that we have CBI, ED, etc., being run by a person from Gujarat as well as Home Minister, and we'll have another Gujarati running the FBI in the US. So the new administration will be fairly positive towards India, despite the problems that we pointed out. So this could be an opportunity for India, a medium-term opportunity in the next 3-4 years. Because remember, the American producers will not be able to internalize their demand. They will try. See, Trump's focus will be on American producers expanding their operations to meet this demand. But that's not going to happen. That will be much more difficult for various reasons. The cost of production would be much higher despite the tariffs. So India could capture some of the market. We are not saying all the market. Small part of the market would also be a big thing for us. A lot of Indian states are trying this. The South Indian states obviously have led the way in the past, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, or Maharashtra, Gujarat. But this time, I think even UP and, well, interestingly enough, even Bihar had a investors conference a couple of days ago, and they claim to have received offers of something like, I forget the figure, 1,75,000 crores of investments. Most of them will not translate into actual investments, but even if 20% does, it would be a big development for a state like Bihar. So these types of possibilities are going to be there, but this will depend on India's growth. India needs to become a high growth nation, return to the high growth nature. Growth has slowed down recently, unfortunately. We need to improve our growth performance. A lot of factors will come in there, short-term factors and long-term. Short-term will be things like boosting investments, consumption, maybe reducing interest rates. Interest rates are still very high, and so on. Longer-term infrastructure, higher levels of human development, and so on. But these are possibilities. India will have opportunities also in this Trump period. Hopefully, we will be able to use some of these opportunities more effectively than last time. The point that there are threats, there are opportunities. There are strengths, there are weaknesses, the SWOT analysis. So that's essentially what we have done here. Right. Now, I think we have some more time. I'm afraid I have to finish at 6. I'll give you one more topic, which is also partly connected with America. The US indictment of Mr. Adani, or rather of the Adani enterprises, Adani greed. A brief comment on this. This is, of course, highly controversial, but nevertheless, you should know a bit about it. I mean, I'm sure you know a lot about it by now, but the viewpoint that I'm taking. You know what's happened. The US authorities have accused Mr. Adani, his nephew and executive director Sagar Adani, Vineet Jain, of being part of a scheme to pay bribes to secure Indian power supply contracts. All this is known. But the basic point is this. How does this come under the jurisdiction of America? If the Adani Group is paying bribes to Indian officials, I'm not saying that they are actually doing this, but let's assume that this is correct. This should be in the jurisdiction of India, the state governments in our country, the central government, and so on, Indian courts. How does America come into the picture? That is a key point that might be asked, and let's make that clear what that means. This is the idea. See, this amount of bribe converted into dollars in the American charge sheet to execute power supply agreements. And this was through SECI, Solar Energy Corporation of India Limited. This is, by the way, a Government of India company. I hope you have understood this because you must have read about it, that the way this works is SECI gives the contract to companies to produce that the power. Then they will enter into agreement with SECI, and there will be another agreement through SECI to state governments to sell the power on to the state governments. Now, if the state governments are not willing to pay a relatively high price at which SECI has entered into a memorandum with the company, then the power project will not take off. This is the charge. Now, why should America come into the picture? America comes into the picture because of this. They say that the bribery was given in India, or at least there was an agreement to bribe. But they issued bonds in America. And in these bonds, they said that the company complied with US anti-bribery laws. There are US anti-bribery laws that are applicable for those companies working in America. If you're issuing a bond in America, you are supposed to comply with this US anti-bribery laws. So this is the charge against the Adani Group. The bribe itself is not the key issue. Alleged bribe. Alleged bribe is something for Indian government and the state governments in India to deal with. But they have given a statement, they must have signed some documents that we comply with this US anti-bribery. You know, that fine print in agreements, there's a lot of fine print of it. That fine print includes this also, when you're issuing bonds in America. You violated this, the charges that you have made, you have paid bribes, you have violated the undertaking that you have given there. This is the charge they have filed. Let's be clear, it's not basically the bribery itself, but this. Suppose they had not issued any US bonds, then this would not have been part of the jurisdiction. If they were not raising funds in America, they would not have signed anything related to US anti-bribery laws. But if you are issuing shares, selling bonds in America, you have to give an undertaking that I comply with this anti-bribery laws worldwide, which means in India also. It's not only in America, that the rest of the world also, you have to comply with this. This is the charge that has been made. Now, this causes a serious setback to Adani Group. Share prices have gone down, for example. They have faced a lot of heat in India. Parliament has been paralyzed, mainly over this Adani issue, right? But there are other concerns also. Look at this. This type of charge affects India's efforts to compete with Chinese infrastructure projects. India has been trying this, and this effort is led by the Adani Group. It's the Adani Group which has played the key role in this, India's efforts in other parts of the world, infrastructure projects. Otherwise, China is the dominant power. Some of the projects have been cancelled. Kenya. The Kenyan government has cancelled the projects on the ground that Adanis are facing these charges in America. There's pressure in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is not paying for the power that's being supplied by Adani Power, and they want to renegotiate the whole agreement. So this is a problem for Indian government's efforts at sort of building up India into a global economic power, which can compete with China. This idea is sometimes put forward as national champion, that you have some companies which act like national champions, represent the country. The importance of the Adani Group is in this context. It's not just in the context of Adani having political influence in India. In the context of they're being projected as national champions, representing Indian interests in different parts of the world. Not on behalf of, you see, directly they're not working on behalf of the government. It's a private group ultimately. But private groups Even when the American president comes to India, a lot of private sector businessmen come along with the American president. So in a sense, they are acting as national champions for America also. Elon Musk would be an example of a national champion today. In the same way, the Adani Group is a national champion for India. It's a setback for India. It is a setback for India. Well, you must also remember that Adanis have received a lot of support in Russia. Have you seen this? Russian government spokespersons, Russian media have all been saying that the charges against Adanis is part of a conspiracy by America to stop the rise of India. I don't think the Adanis have any projects in Russia, at least as far as I know. But maybe they should take up some projects, given the amount of support they have been receiving from Russia. India has not said this. Indian government will certainly not say this directly. Some BJP leaders have talked about the deep state in America. But that's a different thing. The deep state term is also used by Kas Patel. Kas Patel said that there's a deep state which was opposed to Trump. Indian BJP leaders said that the deep state in America was opposed to Mr. Modi and Adani. So this is the issue. And well, the importance of the Adani Group. Now, look at this. You don't have to list it. I'm just saying this. But look at how important this group has become. Coal mine operator, infrastructure developer, ports, airports, employs huge number of people now in the country. It's running the Dharavi high-profile project. Dharavi is Asia's largest slum, and the redevelopment project is being done by they're building a huge renewable energy park which will provide about 9% of India's green energy requirement. Strategic ambitions of India. It'll aiming to become the largest renewable energy producer. So it's important in India's climate change efforts also. It plans to invest 100 billions in Africa. Now, of course, the Kenyan projects have been cancelled. It's operating in Israel. It's building military drones in collaboration with Israel's Elbit Systems, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And by the way, Mr. Adani has said that he will invest $10 billion in the US. This is after Trump was elected. Of course, near future, it is unlikely that he will be going to America given these charges. But he's made this statement that we are planning to invest $10 billion in America also. So you have all these. Remember that we are not talking about the validity of the charges. That is a different issue. That's not something that we are discussing here. I'm discussing the economics of this. And one more point now. What might happen after this? Well, it's quite likely, I'm not predicting it, but I think it's very likely the Trump administration will move to settle these charges with some penalties. That is what usually happens with other countries, foreign companies, which have been faced with similar charges under the Anti-Bribery Convention. They have been settled with penalties. Or maybe they will have a similar offer. It won't be done by the present government, present administration. I think the Trump administration is very likely to settle this. And that will be considered a positive sort of message for India also. Recognizing the importance of India and recognizing the importance of the Adani Group for India. So it's possible. I'm not saying that definitely there. I don't think the Indian government will officially approach them for this. Adani's would obviously, their representatives will approach the incoming administration. The prosecutor who had filed these charges resigned yesterday, or day before yesterday. He quit. Of course, he didn't quit because of these charges. He quit because it was likely that Trump would have removed him immediately after taking office. So he quit in advance. So in that sense, the Adani Group can consider that a victory for themselves, that the prosecutor is gone, the prosecutor who was filing these charges. a new prosecutor who will be appointed maybe will not be so enthusiastic about pursuing these. Some settlement will be reached. That is the likely thing. And presumably before the next session of parliament, so that the next session of parliament is not disrupted on similar issues again. Now, as far as the bribery part is concerned, I have no comments to make on that. So I am making that clear to you. I am not expressing my view on whether bribery took place or did not take place. I don't want to be on record on such issues. But I've explained the economics of this, how this matters, right? I think I'm afraid we have crossed our time limit, 6 o'clock. We lost some time. There are other things that we could talk about, especially interest rate, RBI, and Federal Reserve. Then maybe a few other themes. If you are interested in some other things, maybe I'll talk to Sankal people. If you're interested, maybe we can have one more session next couple of days, right? So there are a few other themes that we could talk about if you're interested, all right?
Yes, sir, please, you can
Sure.
take, if it's possible for you.
Pardon?
Sir, if it's possible for you, do take another session.
I will. I mean, I'll put it. If, the problem is that they would be scheduling other things, but maybe other timings. Timings can be adjusted, right? The timings can be adjusted. I'll have another session. Any questions now at the end today? Please go ahead. Any questions?
Sushant this side.
Yes.
Sir, I have a doubt regarding the Adani issue.
All right.
Sir, considering the politicization of the issue, what stand should we maintain if the panel member comes up with the questions regarding this and they try to dig deeper?
Be careful on what is the question. Suppose somebody asks you, do you think they bribed the government officials? Obviously, you have no evidence for this.
Not yet, sir, but by the time maybe if the interview is scheduled in the later half.
Even then, what evidence will you have? I mean, what do you mean by saying that you will have some? I don't think even the American prosecutors had any clear evidence of bribe, number one. They said that there's a claim that there is some in fact, I could have made a couple of more comments. Let me just add these points. They say that they have electronic evidence, emails and maybe WhatsApp messages, I don't know. If they have collected this type of thing, in one sense, they have violated Indian sovereignty. I don't think the Adani officials would be going to New York and then sending mails regarding bribes in India. They must have been sent inside India. You understand that? They must have been inside India when these mails and other messages were being exchanged, which means that the Americans have been using their systems to intercept mail and messages inside India, which is, I think, a clear violation of sovereignty. They have the capability. But I don't think that is really acceptable, that they spy on every country in the world, collect data and information. Some people in India have also criticized this. Kawal Sibbal has given a statement. You can look up the reference. Kawal Sibbal was the former foreign secretary. And by the way, the brother of Mr. Kapil Sibbal, who is a critic of the Adani Group. You'll find a Kawal Sibbal statement regarding violation of Indian sovereignty by what the Americans have done. And he said that if they have information and the evidence regarding bribery, they should supply it to the Indian authorities. The Indian judiciary can then take up the matter. But you cannot take it up merely because some prosecutor in New York files a charge sheet. Suppose some prosecutor in Delhi files a charge sheet naming Elon Musk. Do you think anybody in America is going to take that up seriously? In India, of course, it was taken up seriously.
Yes, because
the Congress wanted Mr. Adani to be locked up. Giraftar karo, turat band karo. Adani Modi ek hai. This was one of the main slogans. Adani Modi ek hai. Now, ek hai ki do hai, I don't know. I will not vouch for this. This is not my field of competence. But I think that you can't really do this in this simplified manner. So don't accept any of these charges. Well, we are not in a position to say anything.
We'd have to went through or sideline the issue and say what.
Sideline in the sense that, we don't have any evidence for this. But on the other hand, you have to point out that what is the actual charge in America? The charge I've explained to you. That's not basically bribe. It's basically the allegation that they've made a wrong statement regarding anti-bribery law.
Sir, I think we can also state that we are not privy to this information, and justice will
not
take its own. We could just
privy,
say that
obviously
we are
not.
not
Please,
privy
please.
to this, to the evidences, and justice will take its own course of action. And when it
Just-
does, yeah. So I mean, we can just ignore. I mean, we can just say this and not answer the question.
I think that would be showing that you don't really see. You do have some knowledge of the charge. There's a 57-page charge sheet filed in America. It's available publicly. You can look it up if you want. I have got it and read it. So obviously, it's not a problem for you. Nobody expects you to read the 57-page charge sheet here, but it's pretty vague. It's pretty vague. My main point is not whether the charges are valid or invalid. All right. My point is that essentially America does not have jurisdiction to talk about bribery in India. They can talk about their laws, the anti-bribery laws there, and the statement made by the Adani Group there. That is all they can do. The actual bribe, if it is taking place in India, would be subject to Indian laws. So the Prevention of Corruption Act is the law which will apply. And Indian courts could decide on that. Violation of the American regulations is another matter. Okay, so you can say this. And the role of the Adanis is not simply as a business group. This national champion idea is, I think, also significant. This is also important. Right. All right. I think that's enough for the day. We'll meet once more. All right, on a few more issues. If you want a few more things to be discussed, you can just send some suggestions to Sankalp. I'll add them also. All right, economic issues. Please confine yourself to economics, not the politics of it. Right? Thank you.
सर आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.
Thank you.
और आपको परेशान करूंगा बीच बीच में.
अच्छा, एकदम रहेंगे. चलिए.
जी 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 जी.
ठीक है तो क्लोज.
ठीक है सर. धन्यवाद.
राइट.
नमस्कार.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.